Today, surfkynews is speaking to former Marine Kirk Bloodsworth. He's the first death row inmate to be exonerated by DNA testing in 1993. He has spent 9 years behind bars on death row and proved his innocence through this testing that came about. So tell me, Kirk, what will you be doing today to shed light on your experience?
Well, I'm just going to basically tell people my story at the college and my experiences through what happened to me of no fault of my own, but the fault of the criminal justice system. And just as be candid as possible and tell them what happened to me over it was 8 years, 10 months, and 19 days, but who's counting, right? And 2 years on death row. And I was 23 years old, and when I got out, I was like 31.
You were wrongfully convicted in Maryland in 1984 for the rape and murder of Dawn Hamilton. What evidence did investigators find to possibly link you to this crime?
Basically, from witness identification, they said that I was the last person seen with Dawn. The description of this person is as follows: 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. Well, you can look right at me and tell, and so can your audience, that I'm not skinny. Certainly I'm not 6'5". I'm about 6 foot tall. My hair was as red as a fire plug. They got it totally wrong. At the end of the day, 10 years later after I was released, the real killer turned out to be 5'6" and 160 pounds.
So how did all that get so misconstrued?
Well, because the two main witnesses in the case were two little boys who were looking up at a man on the rise of a hill that was near a pond area. So he was in an elevated position with the sun behind his head shining down on the kids. And I think and this is speculation on my part, but I think the police and everybody, the kids wanted to do what the police wanted, and it turned out to be this, it turned in to be something it wasn't. And at the end of the day, I was still an innocent man. They just made a mistake. In fact, both children came to the lineup and never identified me in the lineup until 2 weeks later. Their parents called and said, it looks like our children made a mistake. So they would just take things like that. Even the kids said that the hair in my picture was too red. Said I looked similar to the guy, but my hair was too red. The guy didn't have red hair. So, and they were right in the end.
So that was all they had.
That's
is
it,
eyewitness from two kids that
three other adults too. It's but let's talk about that in a second. They had one adult who testified that he had seen me, and that was the guy that he saw in the area. And they asked him, where did you see him at? And he said, television. So they let him testify in open court that they had seen me from television. And that was one of a couple witnesses that every one of them were tampered with or not. People make mistakes. We were sitting here looking at some of the stuff this morning, and people get things wrong all the time. We don't necessarily mean it. It's just what human nature is. We're not necessarily accurate, and you have to be accurate when you're talking about the death penalty.
What was the most significant part of your life that you missed out on during this 9 years that you spent behind bars?
Well, most of the time between the ages of 20 to 30 years old, people were establishing themselves in life. They're having children, they're either going to college. I wanted to start my own seafood business. I was a commercial fisherman for most of my life. And my parents, and to be around your family and friends, and unfortunately, 5 months before I was released, my mother passed away. And I missed not being able to spend that time with her.
Sure. It's very sad. Very sad for you, but you've turned this around, and you're helping other death row inmates with a group called Witness to Innocence.
Right.
When did you start that?
Well, I was a brainchild of Sister Helen Prejean, who is a writer and a nun. She wrote the book Dead Man Walking, which was turned into a big film with Susan Sarandon, and it was her brainchild. And then we are basically a nonprofit organization that support abolition, the ending of the death penalty, because of we're witnesses to that you can get it wrong. So all of our members are former death row survivors, and we go around speaking around the country. We try to help other men and women who've had this happen to. Now we have 2 women who have been exonerated from death rows in the United States, Deborah Milkey and Sabrina Butler from Mississippi. So, it's very rewarding to me to be able, it's almost like hanging out with other Marines to know what Marines are like. So, or Kentuckians who from Kentucky, I wouldn't know necessarily if you didn't hang out with them. And so it's a very great fellowship to be with these men and women and to share our stories and to help each other out.
In Kentucky, what detectives, forensic scientists, law enforcement, what could they do to better preserve evidence for future death row cases?
Well, they had a Blue Ribbon Commission here in the state of Kentucky who also said that our Kentucky's retention of evidence is inadequate. They claim that in criminal cases it's not required to retain for a long time. So after you've been convicted, they get rid of it, and that's not fair to Kentuckians or to everybody else in the state. We should retain this evidence, and it's not that hard of a thing to do. You would just put it in the same places you would always put it in. You didn't need anything special. It wouldn't cost any more money to retain it than it is when you retain it through a trial. And you should have it until the case is either completely solved or forever. And I think, especially if there's any question of guilt or innocence of the suspect, we should retain it and keep it, especially biological evidence like slides or swabbings or any of those type of things, any type of material that might have biological fluid that could be DNA tested.
You were in a cell, and above your cell was the man that they ended up convicting 10 years after you were exonerated for the murder and rape of this innocent young girl.
Yeah.
Now, what are your thoughts on him? What did you know about him?
Well, he was turned out to be in the same prison I was in, and he actually slept in a tier below me. And I gave him library books, and we lifted weights in the yard. But I was looking for a 6'5" guy. This guy turned out to be 5'6" and 160 pounds. So when the 2 little boys made the identification, they were looking at a man on the rise of a hill in an elevated position, looking up at him with the sun behind his head. So, and then they only saw this person briefly. They just caught a turtle. They were generally distracted. Witness identification is one of the worst ways to identify a person who's responsible for a crime. I mean, we have to have it. People say it was this person or that. But solely to send a person to death row because of that evidence is very foolhardy. Almost 78% of all wrongful convictions in the United States are based on witness identification falsely. And that's the highest number we can have. People just make mistakes. Have you ever been to and I try to explain this to people, have you ever been to a place and say, oh, that's so-and-so, and you go up to them and it's not? It's almost like that, except it's in the reverse. Albert Einstein said that memory is deceptive. It doesn't work like a camera. So we superimpose things. It's colored by, he said it was colored by today's event. So what you think you saw today might be different tomorrow. And so even as 24 hours later, you can make definite errors. We need to fix that.
Everybody has a twin, right?
It does. It's true, and it's. But in my case, it was like Mutt and Jeff.
Not
You
even
know,
close.
we definitely looked different, but there was maybe a similarity in the sense maybe of the angular way the face was or something. But he had a definitely lighter color hair than I did. That was an obvious thing. But one of the things that stuck out was he had a Fu Manchu mustache that just stopped on either side. And even the kids say that, but the cops wouldn't put it on the composite sketch that they made. And they said the one in the kit they had looked too Asian. So they just excluded it. So they had a mustache that was more similar to the one I had and left it on there. And I think we really don't know why, but you can't do that. When a witness says something, you should at least try to accommodate what they saw. And that was one of the most accurate parts that they remembered.
So the man who was convicted of the murder, he's not on death row.
No, he's not. He serving a life sentence. He he was let go 2 weeks before Dawn's murder for 2 attempted rapes of 2 other little girls a year before. A police report about him actually came out 8 days before I was arrested for the crime, and they never went back to check. After I was arrested, 3 weeks later, he was arrested for attempted murder and rape of a woman in Fells Point, Maryland, where he busted in her door and cut her throat, or he tried to, and he got 45 years for that. So he was in prison when this caught up to him, the DNA testing, and they asked me what I thought about it, and I'll tell you and your viewers, it's he has to be accountable for what he's done, and not with his life, because we have to live with what he's done, and so should he.
We're certainly glad to have spoken with you today and speaking with the public at Madisonville Community College today to share your story. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.